Stuffing Professor Fungi is a little different than stuffing most gnomes. For one thing, because we're knitting from the bottom up, we need to start stuffing before we're at the very last few stitches, and that does mean that you're going to have to work with the gnome supported, or you're going to stretch out the stitches with the weight of the stuffing. It also means that we can use some cardboard to help not only stabilize the bottom of the gnome and help him stand better, but do a really cool thing of shaping with the gills. So I've got my two circles here, and I'm just going to show you a little bit about them before I stuff. So this one here, you can see that I have looked at my little purl section here, and I've made it about the same size from side to side, but a little bit bigger. If we have things a little bit bigger, then they will kind of catch in that section and push it out and help pull that bit of the knitting against itself and sort of stabilize. So I'm now going to stuff this in and show you what it looks like. So this is roughly what it's going to look like. Depending on how you feel about the way you want things to go, you can kind of pull against that and try to pop it into that purl. And that's what I'm going to do. I want that circle to sort of sit perfectly within that, stretching it a little bit, flattening it a little bit, and providing a really nice stable base. I've worked hard to balance the realism of the mushroominess of the professor with stability. So that is one reason why we have this cardboard thing at the bottom, but also why we increase a little bit past after we've worked that purl round. So that's one thing to think about in terms of fitting the size. So what I usually do is I measure side to side, and then I cut my circle a little bigger, and then I push it in and I test. Is that too big? Or is that big enough? And then if I need to, I just sort of cut around the circle and sort of shave the circle down a little bit. Sort of like this. So you can see I started with a fairly large circle and then just cut it down and made it work. It doesn't have to be perfectly circular. After all, this is the bottom and we're going to be stuffing things. It just has to be nearly circular. A little bit of egg shape to your roundness here isn't going to be a problem at all. So then normally what we would now do is add weighted stuffing and fluffy stuffing, but before we get there, this is a really good chance to test our other big circle and sort of have a look at what it's meant to do. All right, so what we're going to do with this circle is we're going to try to sit it so that it's perfectly, I don't like to use the word perfectly. That seems like an impossible standard for life and knitting. So what we want it to do is sit nicely, there we go, sit nicely within this white purl ridge. For me, it's white here. So I've got my circle and I'm going to stuff it in. It's going to seem maybe a little too big when I start, but as I pull on the cap, you can see that what's happening is that I'm pulling the purl ridge up onto that. It's catching on the cardboard. I've used a cereal box. So we're looking for something approximately like this. It's pulling the gill section of the cap nice and flat and circular. It is going to be a slightly interesting thing to stuff because we did the short row shaping, and when it's not stuffed, it's not quite as obvious. But what we've done is we've gently shaped it so that the hat tips like this. So here's where you've got your the stitch marker I had you put in. So that stitch marker is sort of the face, and that'll be at the point when the short rows should be at their tallest, and they should be lowest back here at the beginning of round. And that's going to tip the mushroom up a little bit, like tip the cap up so that the face will be settled here and you'll be able to sort of see the gills framing around that face. So we'll have sort of the nose and the beard here, and it's tipped back a bit rather than sitting flat and kind of glowering over. But I mean, if you want to skip those short rows, like I said in the pattern, it's not the be all and end all. When stuffing, one of the key things you're going to need to do is if this circle is tight enough and forces this section to spread, it's going to keep the fluffy stuffing down in the top of the stem. If you are making the circle a little smaller, this will be a rounder section rather than quite so perpendicular kind of right angle here. And you may also find that your fluffy stuffing is trying to creep up out of your stem/body here. If we put the weighted stuffing right in first thing, it's going to make a clattering sound against your cardboard, and that may bother you. If this is going to be a toy, you might want to skip the cardboard sections entirely or use the plastic from like some kind of yogurt or ice cream lid or something like that. And then you may want to put a little bit of fluffy stuffing in between the plastic lid and the weighted stuffing so that it doesn't make kind of a rattling noise. So stuffing gnomes is a bit of an art rather than a science. I'm suggesting you fill up to the second line where we knit all the way around with weighted stuffing, just because of the top-heavy nature of this sort of gnome. But that is based on the density of my stuffing. As we've discussed before, my favorite stuffing is, as we've probably discussed many times, my favorite is split peas. Split peas are dense and small, so they fill in spaces really nicely around each other, unlike, say, kidney beans, which are bulky and not very heavy, so you need a lot of them and they form kind of a bumpy inside, whereas these fill in nicely and just sort of take the shape of the knitting. However, if you live somewhere with pests or other things, you may want to watch my video in the Gnome Schooling playlist on stuffing basics, and I go through all sorts of different things you might want to use for your stuffing options. And because different stuffings have different densities, my suggestion of stuffing up to here may or may not work for you. So once you get things mostly stuffed, have a moment, put your professor on your palm, and give him a little bit of a wiggle. And if he wants to just tip right over, he's too top heavy and you'll need to take out the stuffing, take out this circle, take out this stuffing and add more weighted stuffing. So that's just something to think about. Some people like to put a layer of fluffy stuffing around the outside to line the body and then put the weighted stuffing in the middle. That's something that you may want to do. Other people like to put their weighted stuffing in a mesh bag or a little like bean bag like enclosure. All of those things are, there's, like I said, it's really a lot more of an art than a science. So there's no right way and no wrong way to go about this as long as you're happy with the result. So I'm going to add my weighted stuffing. We're going to need a fair bit this time. Yep, that's about right. So I'm just going to leave that. I eyeballed that bowl full just right. That was not pre-measured. All right, so I've got my stuffing. Like I said, there is a little bit of a rattle that will happen anyways with weighted stuffing until it's stuffed with the fluffy stuffing that kind of pushes on pressure on it and keeps it more in place. So whenever I'm stuffing, I like to make sure that the stuffing is kind of opened up and fairly even. It just makes it easier to stuff evenly. And a lot of the times I have been doing stuffing demonstrations and the stuffing comes kind of pre-dense if I haven't then used it right away to actually stuff. So let's loosen that up. I'm using roving today rather than polyfill, just trying to keep my plastic footprint down. All right, I'm gonna start with more stuffing than usual because this is a bigger space than usual. Usually we're stuffing sort of from the hat, which is the narrowest point, down, whereas this is a nice big broad surface. So let's just put that in. What I'm always looking to do when I'm stuffing is two things. One is creating uniformity of stuffing. So I don't want some areas to be dense and some areas to be less dense, because then that will those less dense areas will compact, and over time your gnome will sort of settle and might get lumpy. So I'm looking for uniformity of density, and I can usually test that with the outside hand. And the other thing I'm looking for is that I'm providing the same, that I'm stuffing all the way to the edges. If I stuff all the way to the edges and kind of spread my fingers out as I'm there, then I'm getting a complete fill on every layer of stuffing that I add. So rather than adding balls of stuffing, I like to think about adding like crepes or tortillas, sort of more like a disc of stuffing, and I can use my fingers and my thumb to stretch it out and get into those edges. You're going to want to stuff the body quite firmly. The body is going to have to hold up the cap on that angle. And with the short row shaping, you're going to have to remember that the neck doesn't end flat. It's going to end on an angle, and you're going to need to stuff a little bit to take that into account. As you're working, also remember to keep looking at the fabric. You can really add stuffing and really stretch it out, and you don't want it so that you're distorting the stitches. You want the stuffed stitches to be about the same width as the unstuffed stitches, and to get the density without getting the width. So density without distortion is sort of our thing here. And you can pack it really nice and tight and distort while you're working, but then always go back and shape up. And you will find that since we need to continue working with the professor, that just the knitting process alone is going to do some distorting, and that's okay because we can reshape afterwards. All right, so this is my back. So this is my front, and you can see that it's not as dense here, and things aren't quite fully stuffed. Like you can see, we shouldn't be able to get this narrow, but I'm going to wait for now and knit a little bit farther. And before I add the next circle, I'm going to sort of firm that up and make sure that things are good. But right until it's going to kind of move around as I continue working. So there's no point in getting it absolutely perfect right now. All right, so I need to first, before I add the cardboard circle, I need to make sure that I've stuffed the neck here well. You can see how soft and puffy that is compared to, I don't know if you can see it, but it's firmer here than here. So I need to make sure that I've stuffed this firmly enough, again, without distorting the fabric and getting it really stretched out. So as you're going, make sure that you are feeling to see if you have it. If you've added the short row shaping, remember to be adding on a slant here so that you're supporting what's going on with the shaping. You can really use your outside hand to tighten things up, make it denser without getting it wider. All right, so this is looking much better. It's firmer here. It's kind of bowing in there. I'm not sure if that's visible, but I'm going to go and I'm going to straighten that out a bit. It will sort of move around as I'm completing the work, so I can also go back afterwards and kind of stretch things and get the final shaping after I'm completely done. But I really do need to make sure that there is enough stuffing in here that this will support things. So it's a delicate balance, this one, of getting it right without overdoing it and distorting things. So just make sure this last bit is nice and firm. If you are working on double points, I really suggest you get it onto 4 needles at this point, because we have closed down a fair bit, but we still need to be able to fit this circle in. On magic loop and other methods, just make sure you're on cables. That's nice and stretchy, and you don't have the rigidity of the DP to worry about. So I'm going to tuck this in, and you can see we're still fitting in, even though it looks really tricky when you just look at it visually. The nice thing about knitting is it is stretchy, so I'm just going to slide this over and pull this up around. And now we can start to see this really coming to take shape. So let's have a look. I pull it up so that I've got the white ridge popping out here on all sides. Let's have a look to see what things look like. So I can see that I've got a little bit of a tip still. If it keeps popping out, that's okay. It's a finesse thing as we keep going. So we've got the stability here in the neck. I can feel that things are fairly supported. It's still going to wobble a little bit because, of course, we're dealing with a flexible material here, but looks like things are pretty good. So now I'm going to push this back down, because all the moving I've done is popped it back out again. And then I'm going to stuff it about half full. The bottom layer of stuffing, you really want to get all the way to the edges. The thing you want most right now is to have a thin but complete coverage of your mushroom cap here. Making sure that as you add the layers, they really are going out to the sides. So get that first layer in and make sure that it's going all the way. Really spread it out with your fingers and your thumb. Push it to the edges. And you will keep, so I'm stuffed up to about here. And now I will work with the final decreases and add the final stuffing. And we will keep going. The step now where we have just 20 stitches left and we're doing the sort of like the final stuffing, this is the point where you really do want to make sure that your cardboard circle is in place. Get that tucked in nicely. If it is continuously really, really fighting you, then you probably have it too big. So you can stuff this higher or flatter. This is a little bit a matter of taste. Remember, you don't want to be distorting the stitches or pushing them apart so much that you start to see stuffing through. Oh, see, that's starting to look nice and sort of uniform and really cute. So I think I'm done. As you work these rounds, final rounds, remember to relax your shoulders, relax your throat. Don't get too grippy and get all tense with this. It's going to fight you a little bit, but try to keep your muscles relaxed so that you aren't creating all sorts of tension for yourself. There is enough tension in the world right now. Don't need to be transferring it into our shoulders and our forearms as we work this last set of somewhat claustrophobic decreases. Just keep reminding yourself, let those shoulders down. As you work the final round, at the transitions between your needles, whether it's magic loop or DPNs, you may find you want to kind of tighten things up. The space is starting to get kind of stretched, so you may find tightening things up before you go to knit the next stitches together will help prevent gapping and laddering at the needle joins.